This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the Ron Paul Liberty Report, August 14, 2002.
Just killed a few days after that.
The one thing that we want to do, we want to talk about the vaccines, and you have written a lot, and you've been criticized, and you have been praised all along on vaccines. And of course, as a physician and somebody involved in politics and all, I've been fascinated with too, because I've seen some things that happen with vaccination. How did you get your interest in that? Because you're a known expert and have been working on this for a long time. It isn't like last month with coronavirus came up, you studied it and started speaking out. How did you originally get involved in vaccinations?
I run the biggest water protection group in the world, and it's called Waterkeeper Alliance. I started out working for fishermen on the Hudson River in 1984. They had a small group of commercial fishermen whose livelihoods were being destroyed by pollution, and I began litigating, suing polluters on the river, and I ended up bringing over 500 lawsuits on the Hudson and forcing polluters to spend almost $5 billion. The Hudson today is the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. It's an international model for ecosystem protection and restoration. It produces more pounds of fish per acre, or more biomass per gallon than any other waterway in the Atlantic Ocean north of the equator. The miraculous resurrection of the Hudson inspired the creation of river keepers on waterways all over North America and then all over the world. So now we own the Waterkeeper name, Riverkeeper, Soundkeeper, Baykeeper, etc. We license these groups, get started. I run the umbrella group, which is called Waterkeeper Alliance. We have 350 waterkeepers. Each one has a patrol boat. They patrol local waterways, and they sue polluters. In 2003, the FDA published a study, a multi-year study, that showed that every freshwater fish in America had dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. And it struck me then, Dr. Paul, that we were living in a science fiction nightmare. My children, the children of every other American, could now no longer engage in the seminal primal activity of American youth, which is fishing with their mom or dad in the local fishing hole, and then come home and safely fish. So a lot of the water keepers began suing the principal source for that mercury, coal burning power plants and cement kilns. In 2005, I had 40 lawsuits against mainly coal burning power plants in the states, the United States, and the provinces of Canada. And I was traveling all over North America, giving speeches about mercury, promoting legislation, explaining the litigation, etc. And whenever I started talking to a large group at one of these big forums, there were always these women who would appear in the front seats. They would come early, and they would stay to the end, and they would talk to me. And they were all the mothers of intellectually disabled children. And they were all women who believed that their child had been injured by a vaccine. And they said to me in kind of a respectful but very kind of scolding way, if you are really interested in mercury exposures to children, you need to look at the vaccines. This is, Dr. Paul, something I didn't want to do. I was raised on kind of the spear tip of rights for intellectually disabled. I grew up with Special Olympics. My aunt, Shriver, is also my godmother, had me working in Special Olympics when I was 8 years old as a hugger, as a coach. I spent 200 hours during high school and working in Wasaga Home for the Retarded. And I had been, my family was around that issue, as you know, from the beginning of time. It's not what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to work on water and on energy. And but one of these women came to my home in the summer of 2005. She was a psychologist from Minnesota named Sarah Bridges. Her son had gotten autism from a mercury vaccine, and he had gotten recognition of that from the vaccine court. He won the judgment, and they had given him $20 million, lifetime support. she wanted to make sure it didn't happen to anybody else, and she brought a huge pile of studies, about 18 inches thick, to my home in my little bungalow in Hyannis, Massachusetts, and she put it on my front porch. And she said, I'm not leaving here till you read these. And I'm very comfortable reading science. You know, my whole life has been about science. All of these lawsuits that I've won, hundreds and hundreds of them, all of them involve a scientific controversy. So I'm comfortable reading science. I know how to read it critically. And I started reading these studies. I read the abstracts. And before I was 4 or 5 inches deep in that pile, I was just dumbstruck about the huge delta between what the public health agencies were telling us about vaccine safety and what the actual published peer-reviewed science was saying.
Yeah. You know,
that really was my, that's how I started down this wormhole and ruined my career and my life, by the way, because it was not a good career choice for me. As you know, it's not a popular subject.
well, my first introduction legally or a campaign or with legislatively, I was first elected in '76, and there was a swine flu, and there were 2 of us that voted against this inoculation, which turned out, I'm sure you know about how badly it turned out. More people died from the vaccine than they did from the flu. But anyway, politics is involved, medicine is involved. I read one place where that was not necessarily a friendly site for you, because they came up and they talked about your position on believes in vaccine and autism. They said the anti-scientific position that you have on autism and on vaccine. Well, I delivered a lot of babies, and I've seen a few bad results after they had shots. And I am not the expert on autism and vaccines, but I'll tell you what, where my inquiries are and my sympathies are with, because certainly a lot of people don't buy into the people who write that and try to paint you as anti-scientific. I know that's the kind of stuff you've had to put up with for a long time.
Yeah, and I've written a book summarizing all the science. I thought, people are saying this, of course, the pharmaceutical cartel, which controls our public health agencies, is telling people, well, there's no proof that autism is caused by vaccines. But here's the thing. I've done a book about it, and the book, I thought this, as soon as this book comes out, everybody's just going to see what the truth is, because all I did in the book was I took all this science, about 1,400 studies, many of them, about 160 of them, showing that vaccines cause autism. And I put them in one book, and I summarized them with links so anybody can look them up. I got 12 reviews in the book before the book was ever circulated. So nobody read it. None of the reviewers read it. Forbes and Time Magazine and Newsweek all did reports condemning it. But here's the thing, is people should not listen to me about science. People have to they shouldn't, what I say is not science. The science is what's in the published peer review. And what Tony Fauci says is not science. What CDC says is not science.
Right.
If you want the science, you got to read the peer review. And here is what the Institute of Medicine said. The Institute of Medicine is called the National Academy of Medicine. It's a federal panel that is the ultimate arbiter of medical science. Congress and HHS appointed and said, we want you to backstop CDC and make sure they're not cheating. The Institute of Medicine periodically goes in and looks at, every couple of years, at CDC science on vaccine safety. And they've specifically looked at the issue of autism. And they have a report in 1994, in 2011, in 2013, in 2017. And all of those reports They say to CDC, you have never studied the link between autism and vaccines. And in fact, they said in their last report, they said, they said there's 178 conditions that we believe are being caused by vaccines. Chronic diseases like diabetes, arthritis, food allergies, asthma, all of these things that have exploded since 1989. Like, the vaccine generation is the generation born after 89. The sickest generation in history. Autism went from my generation from 1 in 10,000. My kids' generation, 1 in every 34 kids. And so, the Institute of Medicine looked at 178 chronic diseases that are now afflicting this generation. 54% of the kids have chronic diseases. In my generation, 12%. No, my generation, 6%. In the generation that was in 1986, it was 12%. These kids are 54%, and they've lost 7 IQ points.
Right.
Let me just finish this. The Institute of Medicine said to them, you have done no science on this, and they went through each of those conditions in each vaccine. And when they came to, and this is on page 554 of that report, they came to autism and they said there is only one study that's ever been done about the 6 vaccines that are given. There's 26 shots of 6 vaccines given the first 6 months of life. That study says that the vaccines cause autism. We're not going to use that study because it was based upon CDC's system, with a data gathering system, which we think is lousy. But they said, other than that study, there's not a single study on any of those vaccines that shows that they don't cause autism. So the agencies have deliberately not done those studies. And it's not me saying it. It's not Robert Kennedy, the lawyer. It's the National Academy of Medicine that has said that.
All right. Daniel has a question for you, Robert.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, you're right. It's certainly not a wise career decision to challenge the prevailing paradigms on vaccines in particular. I can speak for my family as a father of 3 unvaccinated children. It's no bed of roses as a parent either. We spent years being screamed at by doctors before we realized the best course of action is just to stop going, because it's only a vaccine conveyor belt when you go for your checkups. But I wanted to go back to something that's a little bit more in the news, and you made some waves in your recent discussion with Alec Baldwin. You had an hour-long discussion. Something that you mentioned there stood out because it's something that Dr. Paul and I mention very often on our program. You made the point that the death toll from the lockdowns and from the quarantines may very well exceed the COVID deaths in our current coronavirus situation. Such a great point. I would only add to it the dangerous precedent set that from the lowly county commissioners to all the way to the governors, that our civil liberties can be switched off at the flip of a switch, and you can't go outside anymore. So, what would you say about the lockdowns and the COVID deaths?
Well, the civil rights issue is a different issue. But what I've said is that we're listening to Anthony Fauci, who's telling us what what COVID may do on various scenarios of lockdown. He may or may not be able to predict that accurately. But what we need a broader discussion, because we need to know not only what the benefits of lockdown on COVID mortalities is, but we need to know what the cost of lockdown is on non-COVID mortalities. And I think the data are really clear that quarantine is going to kill far more people than COVID. And there was a study back in the 1980s. Back in the 1980s, a lot of people were studying the question of the impacts of, we had big a downscaling of these huge corporations back in the early 80s. There was a whole discipline of science, an industry of science that emerged, of economics, a field of economics that looked at the impacts of unemployment on human life. and other factors. And one of the most famous of those studies that has been cited everywhere said that for every 1 point in unemployment, there are 37,000 excess deaths.
Wow.
The deaths, and it enumerated where they're coming from. I think 9,000 of them were from heart attacks, 900 from suicide. In addition, by the way, this was at a time when our population was 43% smaller, so you need to really almost double that,
Wow.
to look at the impacts of unemployment today. In addition to that, there were 4,000 extra imprisonments and 3,300 extra admissions to mental institutions. And, if we have 30 points of unemployment, which they're predicting now, we're talking about a couple of million deaths, which is
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm running out of time here, but this is a really important segment of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, August 14, I believe. So you can probably find it on YouTube. It's a really a good one. Thank you for watching here.